Hey everyone! Today we're diving into just one short chapter from the book of Isaiah, but wow, it's a fascinating one. It holds a prophecy with this really unique characteristic. It looks like it was fulfilled not once, but twice, with thousands of years in between. So you gotta ask, right? How can a single ancient prophecy apply to two totally different moments in history? One way back in 538 BC and another in 1947 AD. It sounds a little crazy, but the answer lies in this idea called dual prophecy. Let's get into it. Okay, so what is dual prophecy? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's the idea that a prophecy can have an initial, near-term fulfillment that basically acts as a pattern, or a type, for a second, much later fulfillment. And Isaiah chapter 4, it's like the textbook example of this. All right, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the pretty bleak aftermath of judgment in verse 1. Then we'll unpack the first fulfillment, the return from Babylon. After that, we'll jump forward in time and see how the exact same verses seem to apply to the rebirth of Israel. And we'll wrap up by looking at what this whole pattern means. So the chapter kicks off with a really grim scene. We're talking total social collapse. And this isn't random. It's the direct result of the judgment that was just laid out in the chapter right before it. I mean, just listen to this. It's describing the aftermath of a brutal war where so many men have been killed that society is just breaking down. You have women so desperate for the security and social standing of just being married that they're willing to say, hey, we'll pay our own way, we'll buy our own clothes, just let us take your name to take away the shame of being alone. Now, this isn't just some abstract poetry. The historical context is super specific. This verse is pointing right at the aftermath of Jerusalem's destruction by Babylon and that long 70-year exile. So that's the backdrop for our first pass at this prophecy. Okay, so let's see how the rest of this chapter plays out as a promise for the Jewish people stuck in Babylon. Because after that really dark opening in verse 1, the tone just completely flips. Suddenly, there's a glimmer of hope. These verses talk about restoration, about cleansing for the survivors, what it calls them that are escaped of Israel. It's this incredible promise that a small group, a remnant, will make it through and be restored. But the big question is, did this actually happen? Let's look at the history. So let's break down some of these key phrases and see how they line up with what happened. When it says, in that day, it's not talking about a literal 24-hour day, but the whole 70-year period of captivity. Then you have the branch of the Lord. That's a classic messianic reference, a nod to a future savior. He that is left shall be called holy. Well, that points to the roughly 50,000 Jews who actually returned from Babylon, set apart to carry on the nation. And written among the living, that has this powerful sense that God already knew who was going to be saved, kind of like what you see in the book of Ezekiel. Verse 4 really paints a picture of this judgment as a kind of harsh but necessary spiritual cleaning. The filth of Jerusalem is literally washed away by the Babylonian invasion. The city is purged of all its idolatry and violence. And that spirit of burning, that's both literal, the city was torched, and symbolic, like when you use fire to purify metal. And then, right after all that fire and judgment, you get this promise of just incredible divine protection. And the language it uses, a cloud by day and a fire by night, that's not just random imagery. It's meant to make you think of something huge in Jewish history. What's happening here is the prophecy is framing the return from Babylon as a second Exodus. It's brilliant. Just like God miraculously led the Israelites out of Egypt, he's promising to do it again, this time from Babylon. But here's the twist. This time, there's no army needed. God is going to use the Persian Empire as his tool, exactly as Isaiah had predicted, to let his people go free. Okay, so boom. First fulfillment, check. The prophecy lines up perfectly with the history of the return from Babylon. But this is where it gets really wild. The prophetic clock suddenly leaps forward nearly 2,000 years. And that pattern we just saw, destruction, preservation, and miraculous restoration, it's about to happen all over again, but on an even bigger scale. All right, so now we are going to rewind and read those exact same verses again, but this time through the lens of modern history, starting with the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So in this second go-around, in that day suddenly points to the Roman conquest. The escaped of Israel now refers to the survivors of centuries of persecution, culminating in the Holocaust. The remnant that came back in 1947,
They are the ones set apart to keep the lineage alive. And that phrase, written among the living, man, it takes on a whole new chilling weight when you think about the divine hand deciding who would make it through the horrors of the Holocaust.
And it's hard to even wrap your mind around the scale of this catastrophe. We're talking an estimated 6 million Jews murdered. That was roughly half the entire Jewish population of the world at the time. So to be one of the escaped of Israel in the 20th century, that meant surviving one of the absolute darkest chapters in all of human history. The judgment part in verse 4 also clicks into place for a second time. The source material connects that line about purging of blood to warnings given in the New Testament book of Matthew. And the spirit of burning? That's seen not just in the fiery destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, but in the long, painful, 1,800-year scattering of the Jewish people all over the world, the diaspora. And just like before, after the judgment and the restoration, comes that incredible promise of divine protection. And let me tell you, that promise was put to the test almost instantly. The very day after Israel declared itself a state, it was attacked by a coalition of its neighbors. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War began. And what happened next was just extraordinary. There's this really remarkable story from that war, recorded by a man named LeGrant Richards. At this absolutely critical moment, the Jewish forces were completely outnumbered, basically on the brink of being wiped out, when the Arab army just surrendered. Out of nowhere, and when their leaders came over with a white flag, they had a really strange question for the Jewish soldiers. They said, "Where are the 3 men leading you, and where is the massive army we saw with you?" You can just imagine the Jewish soldiers looking at each other totally confused. They told them, "We don't know what you're talking about. This small group, this is it. This is our entire force." And that's when the Arab soldiers explained what they saw. They described seeing 3 massive figures with long beards and flowing white robes who warned them to stop fighting immediately or they would all be killed. For many, this story is seen as a modern-day fulfillment of Isaiah's promise of a divine shield over Jerusalem. So you take these 2 stories, separated by thousands of years, and you put them side by side, and a really clear and powerful pattern starts to emerge. Here's the takeaway, the crucial point of all this. The first fulfillment, that return from Babylon, it wasn't just a one-and-done event. It was a template, a historical pattern. It laid out the sequence: judgment, preservation of a remnant, and a miraculous restoration under divine protection. A pattern that would be repeated in stunning detail over 2,000 years later. And that really leaves us with a final, pretty mind-bending thought. If history and prophecy can rhyme like this, creating these incredible patterns of types and fulfillments across millennia, it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other patterns might still be out there, waiting to be completed? And what does that mean for how we understand prophecy? And what might still be to come?